All right, so let's go ahead with part 4 of our lecture on ancient Rome. We're going to be talking here about the rise of Christianity and the impact of Christianity on Rome's development and later on. One of the things that's important to understand is that as we get into this part of Roman history, there's a good amount of religious diversity at this point in Rome. There are a number of mystery religions. Two of the most prevalent are the cult of Isis, which comes out of Egypt, and Mithraism, which actually comes out of Persia. And these mystery religions sort of deal with secret rituals in some cases and sort of some of the more obscure things, but they are, for the most part, they're present and known about. There's a good amount of religious toleration. Again, it's a polytheistic society that includes acceptance of the Roman emperor as actually part of that pantheon. And there is an overall acceptance of additional gods and goddesses based within this sort of polytheistic perspective. Keep in mind, as we talked about, that the cult of the emperor, which represented the Roman citizens having to appear once a year and give an offering before the emperor's representation in sort of a religious ceremony. So even that lends itself to there was a pretty permeable shell within which these various religious beings were accepted in the polytheistic sort of schema. When we turn our attentions to Judea specifically, there are some divisions there. Now keep in mind that's modern day Israel. All right, Jerusalem is here. Okay, and here would be the Gaza Strip. In 63 BC, the Romans actually have control of Judea, and the Romans excuse the Jewish people from actually performing this cult of the emperor ceremony, and obviously they don't refer to it as the cult of the emperor ceremony, because they knew that the Jewish people would refuse to do it. So they're sort of given a pass in that respect, but that does not mean that while the overall perspective was one of tolerance, that does not mean that there was any lack of conflict. There were many people within the Jewish population, and some of them would be termed zealots, and these zealots were against any sort of Roman control whatsoever, and they suggested a revolt. There was going to be a Jewish revolt in AD 66, and the Romans are going to crush the rebellion. The temple is actually going to be destroyed at that time. The original temple will be destroyed. And in the following century, there's going to be a second Jewish revolt. And at that time, the city of Jerusalem is basically going to be effectively leveled by the Romans. So while the Romans, they do show toleration in some respects when it comes to the rebellions, these two rebellions within the Jewish community, they did not leave a lot of room for they didn't leave a lot of room for resistance. All right, when it comes to the life of Jesus and his message, please understand that this part of the lecture is given as per the curriculum I've been presented with. I'm not purporting any sort of religious perspective. I'm not attempting to shove any religious opinion down your throat. Please refer to your book, and feel free to have any and all parents call me if they have any questions about this particular part of the lecture. Most historical scholars believe and respect the fact there was a person by the name of Jesus that existed. His deity is disputed by many, obviously. Most of what we know from him comes from the Christian tradition and accounts that were written by what are known as the four Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Basically, the story of Jesus starts in terms of his life and the fact that he was believed to have been born in Bethlehem, and the period of his teaching is believed to begin around his age of the word 30. His message or his ministry basically consisted of a combination of moral teaching and miraculous healing. The message did focus on a Jewish tradition of monotheism and the Ten Commandments, but it also, according to the tenets, bestowed salvation on believers. It represented service and justice to be meted out, and it was focused heavily on the concept of love in different respects. Sort of the death of Jesus on the cross is represented in several different components. One being the persecution by Jewish priests and Romans separately, but both in both respects he was persecuted. He was also betrayed by one of his closest followers by the name of Judas. He is crucified, which is a Roman method of execution, whereby you are held outstretched on a vertical post with a crosspiece, and effectively the person would eventually suffocate due to an inability to hold themselves up any longer, because their arms would be held up into the sides. One of the central components here of the Christian belief is that after his death and he was buried, that he actually rose again from the dead. The way that the message is going to really spread is going to be a number of sources. One of the easiest to point at is going to be a man by the name of Paul. And here's a small map here of how he sort of moved around. He did believe Christ to be the Messiah. He did believe Jesus was Christ, and also he was the Messiah, which meant he was the anointed one, and he believed that he was the Son of God, and he believed he was brought here to grant salvation to mankind. And you can see that he had several journeys here, which are going to eventually end up with him being in Rome, and he will eventually be executed in Rome. In terms of persecution, here's a picture of Nero. Again, we've talked about Nero. While the Romans were, for the most part, tolerant, there are some belief that just like the persecution of the Jewish revolts, there was also persecution of Christians early on, especially by people like Nero, and that there were secret meetings of Christians that were going on to try to escape this persecution. Why did Christianity appeal? Well, part of it was because people were willing to die for their faith. They were willing to become martyrs. And the concept there is if somebody's willing to die for their beliefs, then people will be interested in exactly what it is they're willing to die for. And in that respect, the quote goes something like this: "The blood of the martyr is the seed of the church." Every time someone dies for their beliefs, people are very interested in what they believed. And that is a great thing that does cause people to be interested. In addition, the teachings of Christianity that do include an afterlife and that everyone is welcome also have widespread appeal. The triumph of Christianity comes through two different people in terms of Roman leadership. One is Constantine, who issues the Edict of Milan, which gives religious freedom, and then Theodosius goes one step further by making Christianity the official religion of the Roman Empire. In terms of the early church, there were several patterns of life and worship. We see the implementation of baptism. There's two different versions of it pictured here. One is infant baptism on the left. The other is immersion baptism on the right. The one on the left is more often practiced in the Catholic religion. The one on the right is more of a Protestant rite. That's R-I-T-E, rite meaning basically ritual. The Eucharist, which is a belief of is also of both the Roman Catholicism and Eastern Orthodox, which is basically a presentation of gifts during their service, and there's a connection between the Last Supper of Jesus and the church service. Women were prevalent in early Christianity as teachers and administrators, and in terms of trying to gain converts. The way it was structured, the church had the Catholic Church especially had a very simple structure. There was a priest locally. A bishop would oversee several priests in different churches within a diocese. All right, so there will be some divisions in the church, and a lot of this centers around different personalities with regard to popes and power struggles. But we're really going to focus more of this when we get to chapters 8 and 9 and talk about some of those divisions a little later on. Do understand that during this time there were missionaries that went out, and again, the best example of that would be Paul. As we look ahead, Christianity is certainly going to contribute to the collapse of Rome in some respects, more culturally than physically or militarily. But the division that's going to occur definitely in the 11th century will really sort of sever ties. And then what exactly will the church inherit from these new teachings and beliefs that sprouted under its rule during this time?